Hi everyone, so welcome to Investing for Value. So today I've got another stock in demand. This is Wynn Resorts trading at a ticker symbol WYNN. So the current share price is $107.98, down from the share price when it was trading in the past 5 trading days. It went from $128 down to the 107.98, which is quite a big drop. And when you consider a month ago, this was about $137, so quite a massive drop, and current evaluation gives it about $11.5 billion. So when we consider what this company does, it basically does casinos and hotels. So those are businesses that you can probably understand what they do. And basically they have two segments in terms of the operations, one in the US and one in Macau. They opened in 2005 in Las Vegas, and in 2006, a year later, in Macau. And after that, they did in 2008 they did an expansion on the Las Vegas operation, and in 2010 they did an expansion on the Macau operation. In 2016 they opened a completely new place in Macau, and in Boston last year they opened a completely new place as well. So in terms of their revenues have been a little bit inconsistent. Though if you don't like look at the 2006, 2005, 2015 revenues, then you can kind of see like they were going more or less from like 4 billion to 5 billion to 6 billion. So overall, a growing business. And in by 2021, they're expecting about 8 billion in revenue. So this is a company that's in the long term, in a scheme of things, they are going to be growing. In terms of net profits have been good, but except last year wasn't too good. Though you also have to consider that these net profits have been impacted by general accounting principles, where based on their property revaluations, sometimes they might have to declare a tax provision, or they'll have to do a tax benefit, which kind of skews the net profits by a little, well, by a quite actually substantial part sometimes. But in the scheme of things, you can kind of get an idea of how their revenues are. And last year wasn't too good. Their expense structure was quite high, though you expect once Boston gets running, then perhaps the expense doesn't get too high, because you do have to spend a lot of money when you're expanding your operations. In terms of how the segments are going in terms of the revenue generation, Wynn Palace, which was the place built in 2016, generated $2.5 billion. Wynn Macau, which is these two parts here, did 2 billion. The Las Vegas operation did 1.6 billion, and Boston only opened in the middle of last year, so you won't see the full amount of revenues for this company yet, for the property yet, and that was about 363 million for the amount of business that they did do. So in the scheme of things, not too bad. Though you have to look at this and go, Macau revenues make up 4.6 billion, the US revenues made 2 billion. So Macau is making about two-thirds of your revenue. And when right now you've got a coronavirus situation, it's not a good look, particularly when a lot of the revenue in Macau comes from a lot of Chinese tourists. And when your Chinese tourists aren't traveling to Macau, because partially that they aren't allowed to, then you don't actually have much business in Macau. And I expect revenues to be dropping quite a lot in Macau, particularly since you've got a reduced amount of tourists. And also the Macau government in February announced that all the casinos had to close for 15 days. And then from February to 20th to March to 20th, they could only open a partial operation. So you can only look at that and go, around about a month and a half of the operation is going to be heavily impacted. So the first quarter isn't looking too great, and I don't see the coronavirus getting any better too soon. So if the coronavirus just gets worse, you can expect business to be getting worse, because you don't have any tourists coming into Macau, then things aren't going to look great. And also, I've got to point this out, like in Macau, the revenues were dropping anyway. Like in 2008, 18, um, first they dropped about 400 million off the two places in Macau. So that's not a great sight to know that like there was already a decline, and now that you look at operations and you go, if the decline had continued and then you plus the reduction of the coronavirus, that's a very heavy impact to your current business, which isn't ideal in the scheme of things. And you kind of have to be a little bit fearful of this company because in the short term, revenues are going to be heavily impacted. So when you consider that Macau's not going to be generating a lot of revenues, the coronavirus isn't getting any better, the operation looked like it was on a slight decline, then you kind of don't want to be buying at too high of a price, though, they did have their $8 billion, 2021 target, and they have been expanding the operation, so you could say, like, even though parts of it might be decreasing, parts of it might be increasing. Particularly that they're looking at Wynn Palace and looking at expanding a 1,300 room and suite expansion, which is what this company is aiming for. They've got a lot of expansions in the current sites, in all of them. So it's good going forward. Though I think, and that's a long-term basis. So short-term, it's not looking too bright, particularly with the Macau situation. And I think you're going to have it's going to revert back to like 2016 type prices, though given the new operations, I don't expect it to drop as much as the lows of like 60 or $70. But I think perhaps $80 might be quite realistic as one of the low points of the stock. So, like expect the stock to be dropping beyond any point it has in the last couple of years, particularly now that Macau, being the large part of the revenues, is being heavily impacted. So it's not optimistic. No one wants to hold a stock for a whole year with it doing nothing and with declining revenues. And that's just like, that's on the basis that assuming next year the revenues pick up and they normalize again, or else, things do not look too good in the next 12 months. So you want to be buying at a price with a good margin of safety, and I'm going to be saying around $80 isn't too bad. It doesn't necessarily have to be $80, so that's the point I'm going to be anchoring around a price that's going to be a good margin of safety, particularly a company that isn't going to be looking too flash for the full part of this year, and they could be having quite a substantial sell-off if no one wants to hold, or if basically their first quarter comes out and people don't like it, and no one wants to hold for another 3 quarters of like declining revenues, at least for the short term anyway. Particularly if institutions are usually short-term thinking, such like companies, because by the end of the year they have to report to all the investors and they have to show a good outlook. So they don't want to be looking bad by holding a stock that's declining in share price. And some people are always going to be trying to be a bit more clever by selling now and buying back lower. So that all just contributes to quite a big sell down. Though long term wise, I think this is still a very good company. Though I just don't think it's a great idea to be always buying at a high share price. It looks cheap in terms of like, you know, historically, because you can go back 5 days and it was at 128. Go back a month and it was 137. So you might be using it as your justification. Though I don't think you should necessarily use that, as your anchoring point. You have to go back to 2016 and go, if the operations fell by like $1.5 billion or more, then what's this operation worth? And I think it's going to come down quite low, around to that $80. I don't think it will come down to $60 or $70. So who knows? But at the end of the day, I think it has a very realistic chance of coming down to $80. So I think you should watch the stock. If you really want to hop in, maybe you can buy a little bit, but it doesn't look like it's not a great picture currently, particularly not of the coronavirus, especially now that it's not really settled down. Like it's still growing, it's still like rapidly increasing in the amount of cases in Korea, Iran, and Italy, and I think those places are going to spread to other places, and it's going to continue to get worse. I don't expect Macau tourism to be increasing anytime soon. I don't expect China to be allowing their citizens to travel to Macau that much. So I would say Macau operations are going to be heavily impacted, at least for the next probably 6 months or longer. Uh, and then you still have to try to build that. You still have to try to build your operations back up. Though in the meantime they are making expansions, so I think this is a good start for next year when things come good again. Though I think this is the year to be buying, particularly you're going to get a very large dip in the price when the results come out and they don't look too flash, particularly when the operations, you only have to consider Macau is not a big place, and you do not want a lot of people crowding in that area. So even the Macau government doesn't want to deal with a situation where there's been a lot of people crowding out the area. So they're not going to consider, mate, they don't want to destroy the commercial aspect about the place, though you don't want to be dealing with this outbreak of this virus. So they're going to be taking a bit of short-term pain, but in the long term, I think this is a company that's going to do well, and especially they're paying a $4 dividend. So $4 dividend currently is about over 3% return, which isn't too bad. Though you don't want to be just buying for dividend, you want to be buying um, with the share price at quite a low point, so that you have a full upside. No worries if you miss out on a stock, but you don't want to buy a stock and then watch it drop. If you bought the stock at 130 and then you watch it go down, it's not really that comforting collecting a $4 dividend and watching your stock drop more than $20. So it's always a bit cautionary to buy at low level prices. It has dropped a lot, but I think it has a lot more room to drop, particularly how severe their business is going to be impacted. As we can see, into last year, the quarters were quite even. So when the next quarter reports for Q1 for 2020, we're going to get a very good idea of what the next two quarters will be like, and maybe potentially they recover on the last quarter. Who knows? Until then, I'm going to say either just put on your watch list, or you can buy a little bit, but make sure you have a lot of cash to be buying when the price continues to come lower, because I think the stock has a lot more room to fall, especially in the next 3 to 6 months. Until then, good luck investing, everyone.